Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've noticed in the immediate wake and aftermath of that senseless as well as unspeakable tragedy at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School there in Parkland, Broward County, Florida, that certain segments of the population have come forth and attempted to condemn law-abiding, gun-owning American citizens from coast to coast and border to border here in the heart of the land of the free and the home of the brave. And part of the reason that this is coming to the epicenter is because in this modern society in which there are so-called social justice warriors and there is an attempt to create collectivized guilt, there really is this position that if you don't go with the flow, or if you don't accept the status quo of what is truly acceptable with a certain or particular sect of society, then all of a sudden you are in need of being re-educated. Of course, this is something that we've seen with the left time and again throughout the annals of modern history. Take a look at the time of the Soviet Union. When Stalinism was at its height and peak, it was always thought that if you didn't go along with the communist line, if you didn't support the communist line, you were somehow automatically part of a major problem. Someone who was just not mentally with it, not mentally capable. Your mental faculties weren't there, and you needed to go to re-education camps. Now, we typically refer to those as gulags. They're nothing short of atrocious concentration camps that existed within the Soviet Union. And unfortunately, this is something that has come to the epicenter time and again in leftist thought, or in places where leftist ideology is the dominant political force within any given society. It was particularly true in Nazi Germany. The type of socialist arguments that were used to discriminate against a particular minority group or any type of segment of society was utilized. I mean, that's what the Holocaust was. And it was part of a massive wealth redistribution scheme. And we're seeing that it's happening in South Africa today. That's one of the things that's coming up. There's this whole brouhaha about a Australian minister to the government who has opened discussion, or dialogue at least, into the idea of letting white Afrikaner or Dutch descendants from South Africa who are having their property stolen from them, for lack of a better term, to be welcomed with open arms into the nation of Australia. And that has caused the African or South African government that has been implementing these policies, which would be theft by any other name, to come forth and say that he should be ashamed and that he should completely and totally retract the things that he said, because he may have suggested by claiming that what the South African government was doing was barbaric or uncivilized, and to welcome them into a civilized nation, they're coming forth and saying that this is a depraved act of racism. But you see, that's one of the things that has come up time and again. Identity politics, attempting to break down societies into these particular and insulated and discrete segments, so that they can utilize the tried and true, albeit threadbare, tactic and strategy of divide and conquer. This is the same song and dance, the same dog and pony show that members of the group that we have colloquially named as the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, always engage in. And it's nothing new. These things are not new. We've encountered them time and again to the point of it reaching ad nauseum. It's not something that's going to improve at any point in the foreseeable future, because these people believe within their heart of hearts that what they are doing is right, that what they are doing is somehow justified, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. And unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, this shows no signs of getting better. It's only going to get worse. Here in the United States, we've seen it, dating back to the summer that we named as the summer of political correctness, that being the summer of 2015, after that depraved individual, Dylan Storm Roof, shot up the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina, that they used this collective guilt. Just because he happened to be photographed with the Southern Cross battle flag, that's what started the whole brouhaha of attempting to bring down monuments, historical monuments throughout a particular geographical region of the land of the free and the home of the brave. And for what? What reason other than they wanted to ascribe that collectivized guilt to a particular segment of society? But if you ever notice when there's a terrorist attack by an Islamo-fascist, oh, well, no, Islam is the religion of peace. We can't attach those kinds of labels to all practitioners of Islam. You see, there is a double standard, and I know that we have mentioned the double standard on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, but it bears mentioning again here because it's on point. You see, the latest attempt is the same type of attempt that the left has been wanting to accomplish over the course of the past approximate 2 to 3 decades. If we recall, the former Attorney General there in Eric Holder said that they wanted to make gun-owning American citizens the same type of ostracized pariah that users of tobacco products are. That there's something wrong with them, that they are not contributing to society, that they need to be ostracized, that they need to be marginalized. Because clearly they cannot be contributing members to this new grand socialist type society that they want to take root in the body politique of these United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, this is something we can ill afford to ignore, because our fundamental and inalienable rights are at risk. We've already seen it with the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Act in Florida that was signed into law by Governor Rick Scott, something that violates the rights of American citizens just on account of their age. Now, I know that I've mentioned this on a previous Solo Flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program, but again, this is all just building on top of what has already happened. This is the same line of thought or reasoning that we have seen ushered against the American people time and again, and once again, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. Therefore, it falls on our shoulders and our shoulders alone in our individual capacity as American citizens to evaluate this and to stand up for our rights. But there is a disturbing and alarming trend. We know that a few days ago in Maryland, at a Maryland high school, a 17-year-old student there, entered into the premises of the school, shot a female student and a male student, but before he could go on with his Glock 9mm to wreak even more havoc, a school police officer, in less than a minute, was responding to the scene and opened fire near simultaneously with this individual, and he put an end to the threat. Yes, it wound up in the loss of life of that individual, but it goes to show that gun-free zones, as my first officer Jeremy Grapington and I have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, almost to the point of it reaching ad nauseum, have stated these gun-free zones, these failed public policies, such as the Gun-Free Zone Act of 1990, 94, 96, they are what have made things worse. These gun-free school zone acts have literally made things worse. But that's not the narrative that you hear from those survivors of the Parkland shooting incident, such as Emily Gonzalez and David Mediahog. No, you don't hear that because it destroys their narrative. They have been coached to give a particular narrative to the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And again, this is the ugly thing that we see time and time again. The mainstream media has a propagandist narrative and agenda that they wish to foist on the American people, and they will not back down from that come hell or high water. They just see this as the golden opportunity to do as Kat Sunstein, a famous frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist in his own right, stated, in that we should never allow a good crisis to go to waste. Why? Why is that the position they always assume? Well, it comes down in no uncertain terms and beyond a shadow of the doubt that what they are trying to do is to rewrite who we are, both as a nation and people. They want to strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights as American citizens. That's it. Nothing more and nothing less. And they have done this time and again. And once again, I don't foresee it getting better at any point in the foreseeable future, because we certainly see that the leftists do what they have always done. Which is to say, they're going to reach forth, they're going to try and ascribe blame to a particularized group. But you know what? That's the same mentality that Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, all of these tin-pot dictators who dominated the history of the last century, that being of the 20th century, engaged in. Collective guilt was designed to marginalize certain groups so that the failings of whatever public policy positions that they were attempting to put into place could be placed onto this group. It's a boogeyman. It's a scapegoat to place your blame on, because, in point of fact, the system that they were trying to foist upon their people was failing. That's literally what it comes down to, ladies and gentlemen. And there's no way to sugarcoat that. There's no way to get around that. There's no words of comfort or solace that can coincide with or attach with that. It's just an inescapable, self-evident truth. But of course, they don't want to make it a self-evident truth. They don't want to admit that their draconian and heavy-handed policies can be that deleterious, can be that destructive at the end of the day. But it is what it comes down to. And people like Mediahog and Elizabeth Gonzalez, what they want is not only their 15 minutes of fame, they want to have an opportunity to strip and deprive their fellow citizens of their fundamental and inalienable rights. But it's as my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, and I, as well as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, have reiterated time and time again on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Without said fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, we here in the land of the free and the home of the brave are truly left with nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing. That is what is a line of delineation and differentiation and distinguishment between the United States and all other nations in the developed and free world. But for generation after successive generation, whether it be in our ivory towers of academia from coast to coast and border to border, or whether it be in our popular culture, there has been an effort to rewrite who we are, to instill a sense of shame within the good and decent people of these United States of America, because what they need to do is to ensure that we don't know who we are, we don't know what has made us great in the first place, so that they can then make us docile and malleable, so that we will just bow down to whatever insane plan they have. And it goes back over 150 plus years, folks. So there's no changing their mindset. There's no getting them to abandon this, because it has been their bread and butter for generation after successive generation. But where it starts to get very, very concerning is when it comes to the annals of social media. Ever since the premiering of the Wright Flyer on September 11th of 2015, YouTube has been a steady, reliable source for us to put up our information. We considered it a place where you could freely exchange ideas in the marketplace of ideas. But over the course of the past several years, that has been slowly changing. YouTube, which is owned by Alphabet Incorporated, that is the parent company of Google and YouTube, has now released a new set of standards for the types of videos that can be allowed, particularly with respect to the Second Amendment right to keep and bear firearms. You see, they're wanting to essentially clamp down on the ability of people to talk about gun safety, high-capacity rounds, which they loosely define as anything firing more than 30 rounds. They don't want you to be able to have sponsors that are firearm owners. And of course, they've always banned the sale of firearms, although I don't know anyone who would buy firearms from a YouTube video. Basically, they have engaged in a new form of segregation. And I'm sure that this is going to be unpopular with the hosts that we've used, but quite frankly, I don't care. They have become New Age segregationists. Governor Wallace delivered that famous speech at the height of segregation, where he said segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. The message that we are getting from Alphabet Incorporated is gun control today, gun control tomorrow, gun control forever, and damn your rights to free speech, and damn your right to keep and bear firearms. You are collectively guilty. Well, you know what else that's a bit like? That's a bit like Adolf Hitler saying that the Jews caused World War II, that the Jews were the root of all problems that were encountered by the German people. It is the same line of thinking because they are interrelated. And it's an ugly thing to see that this has, bubbled to the surface, boiled up to the top, and basically, and essentially what this is coming down to is it is an attempt to silence people, an attempt to get people to surrender their rights and to engage in a bout of social engineering where we demonize gun-owning, law-abiding American citizens. Well, enough is enough. Ladies and gentlemen, if that sounds like an anti-American position that is being assumed by Alphabet Incorporated and by YouTube and Google, that is because it is. Now, there's already begun to be a backlash against this new YouTube policy, and it's caused them to back off, saying that they wouldn't, start to enforce this until next month, that being April. Well, April's just around the corner. And they've been forced to basically reinstate Stinger arms that they had taken down. And they prompted one of the gun channels that had over 200,000 followers in range to essentially abandon the YouTube platform to go to an adult site, Pornhub. Now, ladies and gentlemen, isn't that quite saying something? when a porn site now offers more freedom of expression than a site whose original intent and purpose was to create a new form of television where users could create content. It was designed to be a bastion of freedom of expression. And yet, here they are, attempting to clamp down on that, attempting to strip and deprive their users of that. Why? Because they politically disagree with them. That is a dark, heinous, and ugly thing that literally has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. But here it is. This is what they're doing. They're clamping down on this. They are refusing to back down from it because this is what they believe. This is their heartfelt belief, and they are going to essentially implement that in a rogue, tyrannical, but above all, illegitimate fashion. The question, therefore, which rises up to us in our individual capacity as American citizens, is where does it all end? At what point do we say enough is enough? You know, on Google Shopping, for instance, you still can't buy a Southern Cross battle flag, but here's the ludicrous and ridiculous part of it. If you then just type, instead of in Google Shopping, in a regular Google search, a Southern battle flag or Confederate flag for sale, you can find the sites that sell them. This sort of token restraint, this sort of token attack on free commerce, on free market, on free expression, it goes to show that there is an echo chamber that exists in the technological sector. Information and technology, IT. An undeniable bent or slant to the left, all designed to silence certain political persuasions, certain political viewpoints, certain political ideologies. Why? Why is it that we are allowing this sort of thing to continue, unfettered, unchecked, unchallenged, in the land of the free and the home of the brave? Because the reason I ask this is, if we stop and think about this under the totality of the circumstances and with a modicum of objectivity, it becomes clear that this is the sort of thing that should never be tolerated in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of these United States of America. It is a disgusting thing to see, because it goes against everything that we have held near and dear as a nation and people, dating back to the inception of this nation some approximate 239 plus years ago. And unfortunately, dear cherished listening passengers and audience members, this shows no signs whatsoever of improving within the foreseeable future. They're going to double down on these efforts because that's what they do. And they're going to selectively cover these issues as well. Now, what's going to be interesting to see is how big of a backlash YouTube is going to encounter with respect to this foolish attempt to clamp down on the freedom of expression of certain viewpoints and ideologies. This type of chicanery, this type of charlatanism has always been unwelcome in the United States. Censorship, though it was allowed for a time, has been highly frowned upon, at least for the vast majority of my brief time spent here on God's green earth. And there's a reason for that. When you stifle creativity, when you stifle freedom of thought and freedom of expression, you become an agent provocateur of tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression. And those sorts of things are vile. Those sorts of things should never, ever be embraced or welcomed in a free society. And so basically, we see that they try and lump together law-abiding, gun-owning American citizens with the depraved individuals who are evil. Sociopaths who want to destroy the very foundation and fabric of the land of the free and the home of the brave. Folks, there really is no way around this, but they don't want to discuss it. They don't want to frame it that way because they have an ulterior motive. They have an overarching propagandist agenda that is designed to weaken the American people. And they will use divide and conquer to distract the American people, to bamboozle the American people, all to achieve their political goals. It's disgusting. It truly is. And YouTube ought to be ashamed of itself. YouTube, of all places, that had become a haven for gun enthusiasts, for gun rights advocates, and for freedom of expression, should be absolutely and totally ashamed of itself. But of course it's not. But you know what? This left-wing ideology that has come to dominate pop culture, that has come to dominate the internet culture, it will backfire. People are sensing this well-orchestrated effort to strip and deprive people of their fundamental and inalienable rights, and they are none too happy about it. Rightfully so. We shouldn't be happy with guilt by association. You know, it's almost like the corruption of blood, something that is strictly prohibited by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Yet again, this is something that those people who are opposed to the rights of the people to keep and bear firearms, one of those fundamental and inalienable God-given rights found within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, because they're afraid of what might happen if somebody can stand up and resist them. Again, ask yourself whether this is about safety or security, or whether this is about making things better for the up-and-coming generations, and yes, even those generations who have yet to be born. Because, actually, none of these things would make the country safer. If anything, arguably, the direct and polar opposite would occur. Because again, if we look at that Maryland school, where that brave school officer in less than a minute responded to the villain that was carrying out an act that could potentially become a travesty of biblical proportions, he stopped it. Self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem, thereby delivering unto us as American citizens self-determination, is what we need to get back to in these United States of America. It is that which has made us such a great nation in our relatively brief yet illustrious history throughout the entirety of the course of human events. But again, it is not something that is focused upon. It is not something that is discussed in any significant light by the agent provocateurs of tyranny, despotism, but above all oppression. Why? Because again, it goes against their narrative. And at the end of the day, their narrative is all they care about. Their narrative is all they have ever cared about. But why? Why is that always the case? Well, it's because they fully realize and are cognizant and aware of the fact that their ideology would be resisted by decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens from coast to coast and border to border if it was allowed to be challenged on a factual base, if it was allowed to have to go toe-to-toe and to compete for its survival. Have you ever noticed that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are always opposed to there being competition? Look at the way that they engender those policies, such as the participation trophy. You see, it always boils down to the fact that they don't want there to be accountability for people's words, deeds, and actions. Because if that were the case, their useful idiots would basically become so complacent that they wouldn't go out and support them. No, instead, it's about a way to where it is a permanent victim mentality that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists can use to strengthen their position time and again. That way they can secure people going to the ballot box. That's why they want there not to be a requirement to have identification present when one votes. But it also speaks to something else. A common denominator that exists in the immediate wake and aftermath of every one of the mass shooting incidents and tragedies that we have seen in the past several successive generations. And that is, they want to ascribe a certain magical or mystical power to firearms, or to any type of inanimate object. It can be firearms, it can be the Confederate battle flag, it can be anything. But the other thing that we see, such as with the so-called hashtag #MeToo movement, is that they want it to be that you are guilty until proven innocent. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. They are attempting to strip and deprive us of the presumption of innocence, something that is quintessentially American, something that made our legal system, flawed though it may be, it is still the best on God's green earth, unique. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, this is part of the other reason why they basically sit there and attempt to come back and say, look, we don't like the term American exceptionalism. We think it's unfair. We think that it doesn't actually speak to America's place. You see, it's all based on a hatred of America. This is the blame America first crowd. And that is how they have operated, and the way they will continue to operate, at least within the foreseeable future, for well over 150 plus years, folks. It's all engendered to try and put it, as they see it, America in her proper place. Well, they can't do that if there are independently minded people who have the ability to defend themselves, who believe in the fundamental and inalienable God-given rights that we possess in our individual capacity as American citizens, because again, that works against them. That is something that tears their system down, because at the end of the day, they're also cowards. They don't want to have to think on their own, act on their own, and to be held accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. But if there is one thing that my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have oft-times repeated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it's that we have to be ready, willing, and able to hold not only ourselves, but each other and our government, as well as these political movements, accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. But you know, I have noticed time and again in the annals of social media that there are those who want to sit there and say, you know, you can't hold David Media Hogg accountable for what he says. You can't hold Emily Gonzalez accountable for what she says. Why? They are the ones who chose to go out into the public sphere. They are the ones who chose to assume a position that is seeking to strip and deprive their fellow law-abiding citizens of their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That certainly should open them up to scrutiny. Nobody's denying that it's horrific that they had to survive such a terrible tragedy. But to go out and to immediately claim that we should just strip and deprive law-abiding citizens of their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, that doesn't logically follow. That doesn't compute. Instead, that seems to be a dark and twisted propagandist narrative and agenda because, let's face it, folks, that is literally what it is. It is designed to strip and deprive each and every one of us of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That has been their end goal as well as their modus operandi for generations. And again, this is something that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. This is why we stress that it is so important to foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of not only our shared United States Constitution, but also our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Because in so doing, you empower yourself as an American citizen to stand up for your freedoms and liberties. It allows you to see exactly what it is that these dark, twisted, and dare I say, nefarious forces are attempting to take away from you. It is a repetitive thing. It is a heinous, senseless, and unspeakable thing in and of itself. But they continue to march on. They continue to appear. They continue to make false statements, such as, oh, the NRA itself is after them. What is with this? What is with this ideology of ascribing magical powers to the National Rifle Association of America, or NRA? They're acting as though it's like the Illuminati. You know, there's this secret group, and they're out to hide under your bed and to punish your children. I mean, come on. It's childish at best. It's intellectually disingenuous at worst. And it's downright un-American at the end of the day. But you're not going to see the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media cover the story in such a way. You're not going to see them admit that there have been numerous firearms legislations over the years that have steadily been chipping away at the right to keep and bear firearms. Why? Because it goes against their propagandist narrative and agenda. And let's stop and think about that for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. The 1934 Firearms Act. The 1968 Gun Control Act. The Firearm Owners Protection Act of 1986. The 1990 Gun-Free School Zones Act. The 1993 Brady Handgun Violence Protection Act. The 1994 Federal Assault Weapons Ban. Of course, which we know, beyond a shadow of the doubt, that at least one of the worst mass shooting incidents at a school, at Columbine, occurred. Why is it that we have all of these acts in place, or had some of these acts in place? The assault weapons ban was allowed to die via the sunset back in 2004. It doesn't stop things. It doesn't prevent the violence. Look, since the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act of 1993, it raised the age of being able to purchase a handgun to 21. Yet the individual who was, eradicated with extreme prejudice by that brave school officer was 17. He had a Glock that belonged to his father, illegally purchased one. Again, it goes to show, no background check would have stopped that. No Firearm Prevention Act would have stopped that. The gun-free zone certainly didn't stop it. The only thing that stopped that was a good guy with a gun reacting in a timely fashion to a terrible situation. And again, The rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are not covering this. They don't want to talk about it, or they want to sit there and try and say, well, it's still ready access to firearms in this country that creates these episodes and incidents, when, again, poppycock. Nothing could be further from the truth. They always ignore the fact that it is the gun-free zone policies that create these incidents, and this latest incident is proof positive beyond a shadow of the doubt that a good guy with a gun actually, literally, each and every time can put an end to one of these incidents. The same thing happened at the University of Texas tower shooting back in 1966. Charles Whitman was stopped by a joint and collaborative effort of law enforcement personnel and private citizens, utilizing their own firearms to try and bring an end to this insanity. And that's the only thing that has come up time and again. But why is it that it doesn't matter what we say? It doesn't matter what we show as an indisputable fact. They always go back to a position. It's because they are wedded to an ideology. They are wedded to an agenda that literally has no place in an open and honest society like that of, like the United States. But why? Well, it's because come hell or high water, they're never going to admit that their propagandist narrative and agenda could be wrong. They don't want to admit it. They don't want to be held accountable because, again, they have their own fantasy world in which they live. But the only way that we're going to bring an end to this fantasy world that they are trying to force on each and every one of us is to be ready, willing, and able to band together, standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity, and putting our collective foot down and saying, no, enough is enough. But if you want to know the real truth about what it is that motivates them, about what it is that pushes them, it is an idea that we cannot have individualized rights, that rights must be collectivized, and therefore, the Second Amendment, if you look at the militia clause, it applies to militias. The militia clause is a prefatory clause. It explains one of the reasons, but a non-exhaustive reason as to why the Founding Fathers decided to include the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights, or first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution in the first place. The operative clause, meaning the clause that actually explains what they're doing, the resolution, be it resolved, therefore, that we keep and bear firearms. The right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. But it just goes to show that these people don't even believe in the rules of statutory construction or interpretation. You must read the law with its plain meaning. So what would the plain meaning of the Second Amendment be? Well, it's quite simple. As a well-trained, well-armed militia is necessary for the securing of a free state, be it therefore resolved that the right of the people to keep and bear firearms shall not be infringed. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the phrase to keep and bear arms actually was used to express private purposes, recreational shooting, hunting, all of it, and self-defense. And you see, that's part of the intellectually disingenuous thing regarding the position assumed by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. It always comes down to a loathing and hatred of the ability of the American people to think and act for themselves, to carry out what's in their best interest, to be free and independent. That's what it comes down to, ladies and gentlemen. They don't want us to be free. They don't want us to think and to act and to react as is necessary to keep ourselves free, to keep our family, friends, and loved ones free and safe from harm. And that should be a point of contention, a point of concern for each and every one of us, because what they do is they operate in a fashion to work against us. They want us dependent upon the government. And of course, what's so laughable about all of that is they always speak out against big pharmaceutical or the gun lobby or this, that, or the other, big this, big that. But never do they ever speak out against big government. They love big government. They are wedded to the idea of big government, and nothing is going to change their hoity-toity allegiance to that Leviathan. But it represents a cognizant dissonance. It's a disconnect from reality in and of itself. It's emotionally driven because when you are at a heightened emotional state, you are much more easily manipulated. And that is why we have always said you've got to examine things under the totality of the circumstances and with a modicum of objectivity. That way you can divorce yourself from it a little bit, and you can think about it in a rational and logical approach. Rationality and logic, these are things that are alien and foreign to the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. Again, the ones at the top, I'm even pressured to question whether they believe this drivel or not. Think about how nerd-face Boy Me Sandorf appeared at that so-called anti-gun march where certain students were actually forced by their various educational institutions to appear in support of gun control. He was out there, standing out there, mingling with the crowd, but there was a security detail armed with firearms. Folks, you can't imagine a better picture to paint the very hypocrisy which we are railing against here. But that is the mentality of the left. That is the way the left approaches it. They're going to sit there and think, well, that's just for irresponsible people, but I'm responsible, or my elected representative's responsible, blah, blah, blah. That's not the way the real world works. But that is the intellectually disingenuous position that they assume. That is what they expect us to bow down and accept with carte blanche. But I'm not going to. And as for these social media platforms such as YouTube, we are going to continue to demand that you stop infringing our voice. You allow discussions of drugs and other illegal things. You allow sexually explicit things on your site. But law-abiding, gun-owning American citizens demonstrating the exercise of their own fundamental and inalienable right, no, you're going to try and encroach upon that? Shame on you. To hell with you. Enough is enough. We are sick and tired of it. It does not apply to a free society like the United States of America. But folks, the only way that we are ever going to make them realize that they have operated in a form that is wholly and totally unacceptable is for us to band together and to make our voices be heard. For us to go forth and to state in no uncertain terms that no, we will not accept this, not now, not ever. The mentality of segregation should have been abolished at the time of the Civil Rights Movement. But it appears that the modern political left in the land of the free and the home of the brave is going to do anything and everything within its power to ensure that we are unable to express our viewpoint if it is not the politically correct narrative and agenda. Screw that. I don't accept that now. I didn't accept it in the past, and God damn it, I'm not going to accept it in the future either. It is ridiculous that these types of things are foisted upon us without our say, without our input, without even a modicum of consideration as to us. And again, it's all designed to push their agenda. That is akin to fascism. That is something that should never have a place in an open, honest, but above all free society like these United States of America. Alphabet Incorporated, you should be ashamed of yourself. To the in-range people who had the brilliant idea of moving their channel to Pornhub, of all places, congratulations. That is a brilliant thought. That is a great strategy. I don't understand why it is that platforms like YouTube can't figure out that, hey, this is a bit like book burnings that the Nazis did in the 1930s. But we will remind them of it. We will hold them accountable for their words, deeds, actions, and in certain cases, omissions when it directly impacts our platform and our ability to speak, to be heard, and to interact with the marketplace of ideas. Because when it's all said and done, that's what it comes down to. We either embrace our rights and protect them with any and all lawful means that are available and at our disposal, or we throw our hands up in the air and give up. Surrender our rights. Forget that we even had rights to begin with, and just ignore it and treat it as though the status quo is a good thing. To my mind, that's not the path we should take. The path we should take is to be vigilant and proactive with the maintenance and safeguarding of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because when you look at the damn near poetic language contained within the four corners of the preamble to our shared United States Constitution, it states in no uncertain terms that we, the people, in order to secure the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, in other words, for the up-and-coming generations, but arguably even more importantly still, for those generations who have yet to be born, to ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. Why? To protect our rights. Because again, it is those rights that define us as a nation and people. It is those rights that ensure that we are a nation of laws and not of men. And it is that approach that ensures that we will stay safe and free for this generation and for all generations to come hereafter. Yes, it is going to take a concerted effort on our part. And yes, I am cognizant and aware of the fact that this is far easier said than done, but done it must be. And if there is any nation and people on the face of God's green earth who is truly capable of accomplishing these laudable and lofty goals, it is truly the American people. We can and we will overcome these hurdles, obstacles, and adversities that have been clearly erroneously erected in our path by these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, because that is the only available recourse at our disposal. Yes, it is a long, arduous, drawn-out journey that unfurls before us. But we can, and we will, build upon our strengths, and we will show those who would silence us that we cannot and we will not be silenced. If YouTube wants to continue to have a monopoly, I think we need to start asking maybe some Sherman antitrust questions. If they want to silence content, if they want to attack people for having a different perspective or point of view, I think that needs to be investigated. And so maybe it is time that